Introduce to you a friend as well as a prominent attorney, Counselor Josh Mann, who's graciously agreed to be interviewed by you guys today. If you want to begin, Josh, and just tell them what your expertise is, and
sure,
you know, so they get a sense. I kind of have been hinting at it, but since I don't know the specifics and the complications of it,
okay,
and the intricacies, and he's here on his day off, guys. So let's give him a round of applause.
not too difficult to come up to Santa Fe.
He's also Shep's son-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah, so that gives me some.
That's kind of he's not going to refuse me there.
That's right.
All right.
Well, I'm happy to be here. This sounds like a really interesting project that Victor's put together. As he mentioned, I'm an attorney, although right now I'm not really working as an attorney. I graduated from UNM in 2006, so I've been practicing for just over 6 years. I worked for the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, which is a state agency. It's the sister agency of the New Mexico State Engineer's Office. And the state engineer is the regulator of water in New Mexico. So anytime you have water right that you need to do anything with, if you want to buy water, sell water, try to establish a water right, groundwater, surface water, drill a well, any of those things, you have to go through the Office of the State Engineer and fill out the right form and pay your fee, and that's how you can deal with your water. The Interstate Stream Commission is a little bit different. The Interstate Stream Commission primarily is concerned with two things. Well, basically is concerned with Texas, making sure that Texas gets its water, and also trying to keep federal laws sort of at bay, primarily the Endangered Species Act. And so that's what I dealt with. I worked mostly on the Pecos when I was with the Interstate Stream Commission, and Pecos is kind of interesting area. It's a lot easier river to deal with than the Rio Grande. It's much smaller by an order of magnitude. These are some things that lawyers don't usually talk in, but because I'm now sort of a hybrid and working with lots of hydrologists and biologists and geomorphologists, which actually, a fluvial geomorphology is what I'm going to encourage one of my children to try to get into, because it's really neat. And one of the great things about being a fluvial geomorphologist is you get to be out in the field all the time, and you get paid to go rafting and hang out in rivers and do kinds of field work. So I missed the boat on that. I didn't know that there was such work in the world. Anyways, so the Pecos River has about 100,000 acre feet of water. And so that's primarily how water is measured in New Mexico, is by acre feet. I think it's a football field, maybe 1 foot full of water. The size of a football field is an acre foot of water. And so about 100,000 acre feet of water flow through the Pecos River, which actually is a tributary to the Rio Grande. It's actually the largest tributary to the Rio Grande, but it doesn't connect to the Rio Grande until way down in Texas. And the Rio Grande has about 1 million acre feet of water that goes through it. And then the Colorado River system, which is a magnitude greater than the Rio Grande, has about 10 million acre feet of water that goes through it. So it kind of gives you a sense of scale. So I worked on the Pecos, where we had lots of issues. One of the main issues in New Mexico, or out west in general with water, is groundwater versus surface water. They're interconnected. They're two sort of separate but interconnected water sources. And surface water is a renewable resource. Primarily surface water comes from snowmelt runoff, so high up in the mountains. So the Pecos River heads up near Pecos, New Mexico. So high up there, you have lots of, when the snow melts, that's really primarily what provides surface flows to the Pecos River. But the Pecos River also gets a lot of its flows from groundwater inflow. And so that's just groundwater that seeps into the river. And so in New Mexico, because we're so water short, people have relied a lot on groundwater. And so they've pumped the hell out of these aquifers. And so the water table is kind of the level of water under the ground. It's sort of a static level of water that when you drill a well or you put your straw into it, once you hit below that water table, then you can extract water out of it. But when that water table starts to lower and lower because of excessive groundwater pumping, the relationship shifts. So instead of groundwater feeding surface flows, the surface flows end up refilling the groundwater aquifer to make up for all the excessive groundwater pumping. So in the lower Rio Grande, like Las Cruces area, there's all kinds of issues going on with the surface and groundwater relationship, and that's really coming to a head. On the Pecos, those issues have already been sort of resolved. There was a big Supreme Court case. Texas sued New Mexico. It was in the Supreme Court for like, I don't know, 10 years, and New Mexico lost big. They lost like, I don't know, it was like $10 million that they had to pay to Texas, and then they had also agreed that they would never again default on their deliveries to Texas. And so just to give some other little background on this, so compacts, interstate compacts are what govern the allocation of surface water between states in the United States. And so there's the Pecos Compact, which is just Texas and New Mexico. Then the Rio Grande Compact is Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, because it goes through all three states. So anytime that you have a river that goes through a state, that state has a certain claim to that water. And so what the compacts do is it sort of apportions the water, so it lets everybody know how much they get. And there's lots of gauges along these rivers. All these rivers are gauged primarily by the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. And based on those gauges, that's how we figure out who gets what. And then there's like credit and debit system that occurs. So on the Pecos River, the delivery point is the state line, and so we've got to get water to the state line. And once we get water to the state line, then that then they do their calculations there, and they determine whether we've under-delivered, over-delivered, hit exactly what we wanted. The problem on the Pecos is that there was excessive groundwater pumping that had gone on. The Pecos Compact was signed in 1948, and it had like these agreed upon amounts of water that was going to go downstream and be delivered to Texas each year. But all this groundwater pumping that occurred in the Roswell area, because they have this really amazing artesian aquifer down there. And actually, it's one of the most studied aquifers in the world. A lot of the groundwater hydrology has been developed based on science and data that was collected down in the Roswell area, remarkably. Anyways, all the groundwater pumping in New Mexico eventually started sucking water out of the river, and so Texas didn't get their supply, so that's why they were suing us. Another important key about water in New Mexico is that we follow what's called the doctrine of prior appropriation, and water rights all have priority. And so what that basically means is senior users should get their full supply of water before junior users get their supply. So how do you determine priority? And so whoever put that water to beneficial use, and that's a term of art in the water world, it's in the New Mexico Constitution and statutes, that's how you establish a water right, by applying water to beneficial use. So once a water right has been applied to beneficial use, whatever that date was is the priority date of that water right. And there's things called the relation back doctrine. So even if you didn't actually put the water to beneficial use at a certain time, if you made a certain amount of effort and showed that you actually were trying to do it earlier, you can actually have it even earlier than the date you actually applied it to beneficial use. So it's kind of complicated. But so there's senior users and junior users. On the Pecos, part of the problem wasn't just Texas. It was also that the senior users were downstream. Carlsbad Irrigation District were senior surface water users. And then Roswell was junior groundwater pumpers. So the way New Mexico water law should work is that in times of shortage, the senior users would do a priority call on the river, and the junior users would get cut off, and the senior users would get all of their water. It's very difficult to do that when you've got two different sources of water, because you could shut off all the groundwater users, but that doesn't mean that it's going to make a direct impact on the surface water, because it takes a certain amount of time for all of those hydrologic impacts to take place. So there's something called the futile call. You can't do a priority call because it would be futile. You shut down all those groundwater pumpers, you're just going to dry up their fields and cause huge economic devastation to that area, and the senior surface water users aren't going to get their water anyways. So that was complicated. So what the state of New Mexico did is they had, after the settlement, or after we lost the Supreme Court case big, and we knew we had to deliver a bunch of water to Texas, we had to figure out some way of doing this. So the farmers down there entered into the settlement agreement, and the state of New Mexico put out $100 million to buy junior groundwater rights and take them out of production. And they developed a well field of like 10 or 20 different wells that could deliver a ton of water to the senior surface water users. It's kind of a strange solution to the problem. The problem was caused by groundwater pumping, and so the solution is going to be we're going to just pump more groundwater. But the idea was that if you took a bunch of groundwater out of production and just in times of severe drought, you pump that water for the senior surface user, then it would work out. So there's a lot more I could talk about with the Pecos, but I won't do that. So now I work for the federal